Good afternoon. Nice to see a reasonably full room for a Friday afternoon. At least OPM is fully in the house. So for that, I'm grateful. Welcome to this presentation. We're very glad to have you with us today. I look forward to a robust conversation and lots of questions about the presentation of budget the other day. But I do want to just note as we get started that we, of course, are the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee, and I know you will have a similar opportunity to have this conversation with the other side of the street, the Appropriations Committee. I believe you're meeting with them on Monday. So I hope we will try to remain focused on that side of the equation, but I'm sure, things do overlap, as you know. So my co-chair, Senator Fonfara, is on his way and have asked us to go ahead and get started. So with that, I will pass the baton to you, Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. It's nice to be here. Distinguished members of the Finance Committee. We're here to present the governor's budget for the next biennium, particularly as it relates to finance, revenue, and bonding issues. And we're going to tee up our PowerPoint here. It's the finance version of what we met the press with on Wednesday. So the governor's budget for the next biennium seeks to assure opportunity and provide greater affordability for our residents, education and healthcare, and is a great place to live, work, and raise a family. And Governor Lamont means to keep it that way. The governor's budget prioritizes children and their families. It maintains and expands support for our most vulnerable residents. And as a result of prudent financial management, we are able to offer individual and business tax relief. What follows is a summary of the governor's proposals for fiscal years 26 and 27. So our budget overview includes our usual chart of the appropriated funds. Here are the 13 appropriated funds that comprise the state budget. The recommended expenditures for FY26 represent 3.8% increase over the current fiscal year. The budget recommends spending in fiscal year 27 that is 4.6% over fiscal 26. By any objective measure, that is very healthy spending growth, higher than inflation. Details will follow, but I want, before we get into the budget specifics, just let you know about our task, our spending cap challenge that we had. Our task in building this budget began with a review of the costs of current services and our annual mandate to balance the budget while complying with the constitutional and statutory framework established for our state government's budget. As it happened, we had a real challenge in fiscal year 26. There had been no adjustment in fiscal year 25, which was a missed opportunity to make needed adjustments in appropriations. As regular readers of our monthly controller's letter know, that our current fiscal year 25 spending is running about $450 million above the enacted budget. Some of the challenges, as you can see on this chart, we showed you this 3-line graph back in December when we were in front of you with the fiscal accountability report. That's what the world looked like to us in about the November timeframe. The blue line there is the current services expenditures projected to run far above our available spending cap, as well as the revenue available to balance the budget. Despite the robust growth rate for the spending cap in fiscal year 26, which is about 5.11%, we are experiencing having to, as I mentioned, not having grown the budget in 25, we're going to have to pick up basically 2 years worth of growth in 26. It reflects significant growth in Medicaid. The Medicaid program, again, we detail some of our current challenges there in our monthly letter. We have fully phased in this budget the ECS formula that was accelerated by 2 years last session or session before last. The cost to support our DOT bus and rail operations is also ever increasing, as well as a variety of operational costs across state government. And in addition, as you know, we are relying in the current fiscal year on some carry forward revenue from prior years, which obviously creates a structural hole that we have to appropriate up to in the out year. So with the spending cap challenges in mind, this is some detail on the general fund. Healthy growth in the numbers year over year. The policy changes column there, and all of this, of course, is on our website and has been since Wednesday at noon. So folks will have had a chance to review it. I won't dwell on the text of our PowerPoint for that reason. But this shows that we do have balance in both years, albeit narrowly. We were making, of course, the revenue cap adjustment there at the bottom last 2 rows. And that leaves, as you can see, a $304 million buffer in 26 $317.8 million buffer in 27 of projected revenues that we do not appropriate. We have detail on the special transportation fund with some transferred funds between the years to keep revenues sufficient to balance expenditures. We recommend in this budget moving the Town Aid Road back to the capital budget. We had just moved it on to the STF 2 years ago. We recommend for balance that we pull that back out and just do that as we had done for years as a capital matter. Again, we had to deal with this special transportation fund. We've got some bus and rail changes that are listed here. We'll detail those later. I don't know if that's on this slideshow or the approach slideshow. I forget that. We have a narrow operating balance, though, as you can see at the bottom, for the special transportation fund. We do have a cumulative balance in the out years, though, a healthy one of over $500 million. So, to the guardrails. The governor has heard the concerns about the fiscal guardrails and whether they might be too restrictive in terms of setting aside revenue that might otherwise allow us to provide for the needs of our residents in the operating budget. He directed OPM to consider whether the threshold for the volatility cap might be adjusted to reflect a more representative starting point. So this slide shows you that in 2017, when the volatility cap threshold was set, it was based on that year's receipts of the estimates and finals portion of that tax type. It was $3.1 billion, which was actually lower than the 4 previous years' receipts in that tax type. If you took an average of the 5 years prior to 2017, you would have gotten $3.3 billion as your starting point, which if you grew it by the amount of the statute that governs how the threshold grows year over year, you would today have for the general fund $288.9 million available for spending and about $304.5 million available for spending in FY27. We did that calculation. We've made that assumption, and we are assuming that in our budget as revenue for the general fund. Now, that will require to raise the threshold by the terms of the statute that describes the threshold, a 3/5 vote of both houses of the General Assembly. But the volatility cap statute, when passed, assumed that the threshold might be adjusted in the future based on changes in the economy. The next chart, next slide illustrates where we landed. The middle 2 bars there show current law for 26 and 27, where we'd be in terms of the volatility cap and its threshold. Those are the percentages of the volatile revenues available to the general fund in the green, and that left over in the gray at the top is the amount that is a buffer in case the volatility revenues do not come in as projected. So those amounts are not counted on for the general fund. But if, in fact, the numbers do come in, they are available then for deposit in the budget reserve. So where we landed is the 2 columns on the right at 81% in the first year of volatile revenues going to the general fund and 82.9% in the second year. Those buffers at the top got a little narrower, but that represents between the new math that we did on the 5-year average, as well as where we landed with these percentages, that represented where the governor was comfortable in adjusting the cap to. So that's our recommendation to you, that we adjust it by that amount, and our budget does assume that as revenue to the general fund. That brings us to some of our spending. We're going to tell you about this part of the spending because it does involve use of unappropriated surplus. Governor Lamont proposes to set the state on a course to develop over a number of years a universal preschool system for children in this state. The down payment on that is a proposed universal preschool endowment to make pre-kindergarten and early childhood education affordable and accessible for all of our kids. The universal preschool endowment is at the heart of our affordability and opportunity agenda, giving our kids the best opportunity at the starting line of life, saving their parents thousands of dollars and giving those parents the freedom to go to work if they choose. To fund this, surplus funds from the current fiscal year will seed the fund unless needed to fill the budget reserve fund up to the 18% level. The endowment will build over time, and the hope is that it will eventually throw off enough income to cover the state's share of a universal preschool system. After the deposit initially of the unappropriated surplus in fiscal 25, our provision states that the unappropriated surplus going forward for every fiscal year, if it does show up, if any, would be transferred to the endowment. It'll be managed by the treasurer like he manages the pension funds as a trust fund. Hopefully it will grow over time. But the Commissioner of Early Childhood, in consultation with the Commissioner of Education, is authorized to expend up to 10% of the balance in the endowment in any fiscal year. The idea there is that along with our general fund investments, which we will be detailing with the Appropriations Committee on Monday, we've got about over $100 million in general fund investments in children and their families as well. But we'll be able to expend 10% of this endowment to help build out the child's preschool system for the state. There's a lot of capacity will have to be created, both in terms of the workforce and the facilities that will be needed to make that work. So it's a multi-year exercise, and it will take a number of years to build out the new slots, the new spaces, as well as get funding in place to reduce the costs for the families. So staying in the finance theme, as you may recall, the state entered into an agreement in the first year of the Lamont administration to settle litigation with the state's hospital industry. The expiration of that agreement at the end of fiscal year 26 presents an opportunity to make adjustments in the hospital tax and the supplemental payments related to that tax. Recognizing the overall increase in hospital revenues in the years since the hospital settlement agreement was reached back in 2019, the governor's budget proposes updating the revenue base for the hospital tax from tax year 2016 to tax year 2024. This will generate additional revenue beginning in fiscal year 27. Under the governor's proposal, hospital supplemental payments would be increased a corresponding amount, which would be distributed to the hospitals in the aggregate, the industry, generating additional federal revenue because it's a payment made under Medicaid. It draws down federal reimbursement. The chart here shows what our proposed distribution of those funds would be. Alongside that initiative, the comptroller has suggested that there may be a way to negotiate reduced costs to state employees and retirees at the hospitals, in exchange for which the savings therefrom, savings to the state, would also be returned to the hospitals with an additional amount as an incentive. This would also generate additional federal revenue because, again, it would be going out as a payment under Medicaid. So the slide details the specific numbers that we propose, and we are assuming those numbers in our revenue schedule as new revenue to the state. The goal of this combined initiative is to leverage greater funding for the state, as well as incentivize the hospitals to invest in measures that will advance the goals of access, quality, outcomes, and affordability. Brings us to municipal aid. The governor's budget fully funds the appropriated general government municipal aid formula grants. We provide in the first bullet there for some essentially technical and conforming changes that reflect current services and the statutory funding requirements, but it will result in towns not receiving anything less than they are supposed to under the statutory grants. The second bullet there recommends removal of a provision that distributes surplus funds in the municipal revenue sharing account fund. Since we don't know what amount that will be at the beginning of the fiscal year, neither we nor the towns are able to rationally plan. So the idea is to let any surplus remain and be available for the General Assembly to make decisions on later. That surplus exercise happened once. It was unexpected for both the towns and us. And of course, it's not even possible in the current situation because the municipal revenue sharing fund, with the slight decline in sales tax, it's not funded high enough to make all of those municipal grant payments. So we're actually, as you'll see in one of our charts, transferring general fund revenue to make sure that the MRSF has enough revenue to take care of all the municipal grants as they are laid out in the statutes today. The third bullet down there refers to the cap on municipal spending. There's an existing cap on municipal spending that is, since we're proposing revising the surplus distribution out of the MRSF, there's no way to for the state to enforce or provide any sort of consequence for the failure to make the municipal spending cap. So we're simply revising that to apply to the supplemental revenue sharing grant in case your municipality is not in compliance with the cap. We are proposing two changes to some of our bond-funded local and programs for bond funds to towns steep and low SIP, which many of you are familiar with. We're recommending that we modify that to require at least utilization of, or a plan for utilization of, prior allocations before we disperse new steep grants or low SIP grants, trying to avoid the backlog situation that we have in some areas. As I mentioned, funding for Town Aid Road, it's about 60 million in grants. We're recommending that go back to the capital budget. Which brings us to revenue initiatives, principal work of this committee. Reminding you with this chart of the work that we've done with you over the last 6 years to enact tax relief under the Lamont administration. It included the largest income tax cut in the state's history, at least the history since we had the income tax. And it will be annualized at the end of this biennium, a total of $888 million of tax relief that we've worked together on, and we should all be proud of. That brings us to this year's proposals from the governor. We've got slides on all of these, but I'll run you quickly through the highlights. The signature broad-based tax relief that the governor proposes this year is an increase in the property tax credit. That's the credit against your personal income tax based on property taxes paid to the town. We'll have a chart on that. It's an $85 million item. The governor as well proposes eliminating certain occupational license application and renewal fees. We'll have a chart on that. There's a corporation tax reform effort. There's several provisions, about a half dozen provisions, which we will detail shortly. You can see there the health provider tax and hospital supplemental payment provisions we recommend are included in our revenue for the second year. As well, the volatility cap threshold being coming over, that extra money is listed here on our revenue schedule. Would draw your attention to line 13. I mentioned this before. The general fund is subsidizing the municipal revenue sharing fund by $85 million in the first year. That's to keep all the towns whole for the statutory grants that they're expecting. The next slide is detail on enhancing the property tax credit. So we are doing two things here. We're increasing the credit from $300 to $350, and we're expanding the range of incomes for which the credit is available. It's anticipated to benefit approximately 800,000 filers, and as I mentioned, it's $85 million in tax relief. This chart shows the distribution of the benefits of the new property tax credit enhancement. About 2/3 of the benefit flowing to those filers at 100,000 or less. The governor has a proposal to eliminate professional licensing fees, application and renewal fees for a variety of license categories that are listed here. It's about 180,000 workers, and it will result in savings for those careers in healthcare, education, and skilled labor. These are in-demand professions where the governor wants to encourage folks and give them a little helping hand in their career path. Which brings us to our business tax reform proposal. The governor proposes to reform our corporate tax structure by eliminating a policy that disincentivizes companies to locate and grow in Connecticut, and by eliminating preferential tax treatment for a handful of companies. The governor proposes to repeal the capital base tax, which is imposed on new and growing companies that have not yet achieved profitability. Coupled with the increase in the credit exchange for biotech companies, the governor wants to encourage new companies to build it here in Connecticut. The governor also proposes to eliminate two tax preferences that only benefit a handful of companies and that aren't based in sound tax policy. One would eliminate the unitary cap. All corporations starting in 2016 were required to calculate their corporate income tax on a unitary basis, except that a carve-out was put in place to allow what amounts to fewer than 20 companies per year to continue to calculate their tax using the old rules, effectively a cap on their liability. The second would eliminate a tax preference that allows a small number of companies to use more net operating losses than are otherwise allowable under the law. So the governor proposes to remove both of those exceptions and require all those companies in those categories to calculate their tax on the same basis. So we have some detail on the combined unitary reporting cap. Of the 28 states that have the unitary basis for taxation, we're the only one that has this cap feature. As I said, fewer than 20 firms benefit from the cap, but it does represent $133 million in revenue in the first year and $83 million in the second year. With regard to the net operating loss provision, This is about an $8 million item in both years. This allows firms, the current NOL provision allows firms with greater than $6 billion of cumulative net operating losses to deduct those losses equal to 100% of their corporate tax liability. The other companies can only apply it to 50%. This would simply put the very small handful of companies to whom this applies in the same category as the other companies. Again, it's an $8 million item in both years of the biennium. The film production tax credit comes in for some proposals for reform from the governor. The chart on the right there shows you the history of this tax expenditure. It's $1.5 billion that has gone out for this provision in the last 17 years. As you can see, quite a bit of support for that particular industry. The governor proposes a modest change. Instead of allowing 30% of qualifying expenses to qualify for the credit, we would simply move that to 25% of such expenses. If you look at the list of what the percentages are that states around the country who do provide this credit, and about 38 do, about 12 don't. But of the 38 who do, 25 is roughly in the middle. This results in $9 million revenue in 26, about 17 million in 27. The corporation tax surcharge, this has been a provision that's been on our books for quite a while, as you can see there, from income years starting in 2003. The rate has moved around. It's been 10% since 2018. We're proposing to extend this for 3 more years. It is worth $48 million in fiscal 26 and $80 million in fiscal 27. The capital-based tax is tax on capital stock, profits, and reserves. There's a mill rate that applies to it, as you can see on the schedule. It's scheduled to actually go away in 2 years, but we're proposing to accelerate that phase out. It's worth $15 million in the first year, $20 million in the second year. Some 6,500 firms would benefit from this. So we're recommending that tax break for some of our businesses around the state. And lastly, the investment in the biotech firms, the tax credit there, it's a reimbursable tax credit if they can't use it. Instead of 65% of the value, we're going to let them exchange that for 90% of the value. It's a relatively modest hit to the general fund, $1.8 million, but it is an important industry that we've been trying to cultivate here for quite a while. Currently estimate 25,000 jobs in the state and almost $7 billion in gross state product attributable to the biotech industry. Brings us to our capital budget, the Bond Act, proposed Bond Act. The governor has housing affordability, economic development, climate resiliency, and investing in the state's own properties and facilities as our major themes and priorities. Proposing authorizations of $2.5 billion in each of the years in the general obligation side, 1.5 of STO in both years, 50 million and then 500 million in revenue bonds in the 2 years. Themes in our capital budget, familiar to you. When you combine all of it, both the revenue side and the GO side, it's 4 billion, 4.1 in the first year, 4.6 of new authorizations in the second year. Transportation, obviously the largest wedge there. Economic development, DECD has an array of programs, Manufacturing Assistance Act, Urban Act, Community Investment Fund. We'll have a new program to tell you about in a second. Housing, the governor's continuing his historic commitment to housing with another 825 million of authorizations in the biennium. The K-12 education sliver there, that is essentially the school construction budget. And as well, we have a variety of projects in the heading of climate resiliency and energy. And more highlights under the housing supply. The popular Time to Own program gets another 100 million over the biennium. We have a variety of climate resilience and environmental infrastructure projects. The largest lion's share of those are in the clean water and drinking water areas. In the area of economic development, there is a new gray fields revitalization program that DECD would like to start. This would be to repurpose vacant and underutilized commercial spaces, such as strip malls that have effectively gone out of business. Possible use there might be housing, but it could also be new commercial uses. Brownfields, of course, a continuing perennial investment that we make, as well as additional manufacturing innovation fund authorization. In terms of education infrastructure, we've got our new school construction, another billion or so. There it is. school construction of $1 billion over the biennium. We're proposing a new technical high school in Wyndham, as well as maintenance and repair funds for our RESCs, regional education service centers, and the technical high school system generally. Our usual municipal aid formulas and grants on the capital side: STEEP, LoSIP, Town Aid Road. The Lot SIP program has been around since 2013. For state assets, we're proposing to replace the Whiting Forensic Hospital. There's some design and pre-construction costs included in authorization. There's also some design and planning costs for new courthouses in both New Haven and Bridgeport. Judicial branch would like to consolidate a variety of the judicial facilities they have in those cities, and this is beginning design and planning for those efforts. As well, the capital area system heating and cooling loop needs more work. We've got some bond funds for that. Transportation, the blue bars there are the federal funds. The green bars are the state funds. The governor likes to say we're punching above our weight in terms of being able to draw down federal funds to our state. We have a lot of shovel-ready projects, as well as a lot of older infrastructure. So that has gotten us a lot of very needed attention from the federal government in terms of their transportation funding. And that is increasing all the time. All very good news. Keeps DOT very busy. I mentioned the governor's historic commitment to housing. We continue that. As you can see in the current biennium, almost $900 million of new authorizations. We're continuing that with another $825 million of new authorizations. We're trying to build housing wherever we can, try and help with that issue. We have a list here of our environmental infrastructure projects. As I mentioned, the largest sums there are around clean water and drinking water. As well, we have a new fund there for $15 million for grants to victims of a catastrophic event. The idea there is that municipalities, businesses, and individuals may have some rather quick needs in the wake of a flood, as we had last fall. We would like to have some quick contingency fund to dip into before FEMA shows up and Small Business Administration and that sort of thing. As well, there's other dam repair and flood control monies in this list as well. That brings us to our end. With terms of the Finance Committee, we have a balanced budget that maintains fiscal discipline. I spoke to you about the Universal Preschool Endowment. We'll be talking to APROPS on Monday about special education and the over $100 million in new investments in kids and their families, as well as private providers getting 3% a year in the biennium in the governor's budget. I mentioned the historic commitment to housing, as well as for your benefit, for your information, the tax relief for individuals and businesses. With that, I'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for a tight presentation, going through a lot of detail there. I will kick us off with a couple of what I hope are sort of big picture questions. One is just on the it's a big shift to for the governor and you to be suggesting a change to the guardrails. And there, of course, has been a lot written recently about the philosophy behind what that threshold should be. Should it truly reflect the difference between, you know, volatile revenues and stable revenues, or is it about other priorities in terms of just sort of constraining our spending in various ways? And I see, you know, the chart in terms of moving towards a rolling average, but I wondered if you had, are there philosophical underpinnings here that got you to where you are in terms of that number?
The governor is strong on preserving the guardrails, and we do that. This is an adjustment to, there's two adjustments here. One is the volatility cap statute itself, by its terms, assumed it was going to be adjusted one day. That's why there's a provision in it that says you can, the General Assembly with a 3/5 vote can adjust the amount of the threshold. And that's what we're recommending. It's a one-time adjustment based on that particular 5-year average. It's not a rolling average. It's the average those 5 years grown by the statutory formula. So it results in the new amount, which again will grow into the future by the statutory formula. So the law that was enacted in 2017 contemplated that it would be raised, and we are having heard the concerns of folks that perhaps we were saving too much and being too restrictive. Could we not find a more representative starting point for that? And that's what that exercise was for us. We landed in a place of comfort for the governor in as much as we preserve that extra volatile revenue that isn't going to the general fund. We preserve a volatility cap into the near term. And that's where we landed with that. The other change to the guardrails, to the extent that it is, the spending cap provision of the state constitution contemplates that unappropriated surplus can be appropriated for things other than paying down debt, again, by a 3/5 vote of the General Assembly. So by its terms, the spending cap provision of the Constitution makes this possible, and we are doing what the law allows us to do. So we are complying with the law that governs those two guardrails, and we are preserving those guardrails.
I agree with you on that today. This is the law does explicitly invite us, give us a mechanism for making adjustments should those become necessary. I was more curious about the rationale behind where we arrived. So the other thing I just want to ask is what I'm concerned about, and this, I'll focus my question on finance end of things, but how we, as government, think about things that are cuts today, but that hurt us in the future. They save us money today, but they cost us money in the future. And I know our budget process, that's sometimes very hard for us to take into consideration. We do a 2-year budget. So for example, I am concerned about the DRS, Department of Revenue Services, and holding them at a low staffing level, and concerned that that is going to hit our revenue going forward. And these projections that we have here are not going to be able to come in for us. And I know that others share that concern. I wondered whether you could comment on that.
I do. The tax gap study that was presented to you recently was an occasion for us to work with DRS on that study. We spent some time with them on that. Our take on that is that we would like to do more work with them, and perhaps with a consultant, to take an independent look to determine what best practices there might be around tax collections and how we align with other states. You may know that in the case of some of our larger tax types, whether it's the personal income tax or the corporation business tax or the pass-through entity tax, the taxpayer starts with federal AGI. The state tax audits, which enforce that, are generally about confirming the deductions from the federal AGI. It takes a federal audit to know whether or not the federal AGI was correctly arrived at. We'd like to get a better handle on what do we look at in a state audit? Do we get behind that federal AGI number with those taxpayers or not? I'm not sure. We did take a look at the numbers in the study. The study itself had numbers that we thought were pretty inconclusive about whether or not there was an actual correlation between number of personnel and production of audits and closing of cases. Not sure that that was established particularly well. I think if we can look at repurposing what we have there, we have made some investments in terms of the auditing and analytics function. In fact, we were a few years ago looking at trying to assume some more revenue from that. That hasn't quite materialized. We'd like to work on what's that about? Why haven't we realized more from that particular investment? So I'd like to do some further study there to understand that. Additionally, I think that, and we've talked about this internally, again, this tax gap study got us thinking about this. It may well be that one way to get more revenue is indeed to get better and smarter about enforcement, but also we could do a better job of guidance, providing clear guidance early and often to taxpayers. Some people aren't trying to cheat on their taxes. They just are going to resolve an ambiguous tax provision in their favor. Tax law is complicated. If you're a taxpayer and you come upon a particular provision, you may not report it accurately or calculate it accurately, resolving that ambiguity in your own favor. If you had clear guidance, a signpost or something from the agency on a regular basis that resolved that ambiguity, you might actually pay the correct amount in the first instance. So we think we can do a lot more in that way to sort of help with compliance as opposed to coming at them from an enforcement perspective later. We think that's a better practice as well, that if we could repurpose some of the resources that we have there, that might get us as much or more in the way of new compliance.
I mean, DRS has been pretty clear that additional staffing also, I think we've had conversation in this committee about the importance of, as you know, a lot of taxpayers aren't trying to evade taxes. They just don't know what they're doing. But it is increased staffing that will help them do that. And DRS has been pretty clear about that. I don't know whether you disagree with that. And I wondered whether, I mean, DRS has also been pretty clear that the, hiring of additional personnel pays off. It has a quite clear return on, in terms of revenue brought in, but it sounds like you are not comfortable with that.
I'm not. I think the numbers in the study that came out itself speak to that. There's been a modest drop in the amount of audit staff, but a precipitous drop in the number of closed cases and the monies coming from those audits. There's probably something else going on there. Again, I think that requires a little more research on our part, a little more due diligence. And I think we can repurpose what's there to get some better results. It's not always about enforcement. Sometimes it's about better guidance. More often, when audits are resolved and there's a question that gets resolved, the results of that can be made public so that folks in a similar situation might not make that mistake. So I think there's a number of things we could do at the administrative level to improve those numbers. And I'd like to explore that before we talk about adding more personnel.
Just note that, reassigning people, that decreases, doesn't hold audit function stable. That decreases it even further if you're repurposing them to another area.
I don't know that we have to repurpose them. We have plenty of smart people there at that agency. I know many of them personally. It may be a reorientation of what they do and managing them differently and giving them different priorities.
Well, I will honor the committee custom, our custom of 2 questions. I know that was more than 2 questions, a lot of follow-up, but indulge myself with just an observation as we pass the mic to others, and that I welcome the increased capital investment in various areas. I think it's, again, in terms of return on investment, I think that's really important work. But I look forward to working with you on making sure that those processes work better than they have always in the past. Sometimes I know we have obviously structural issues that sometimes hold up, bonding money going out with the speed at which I think people expect, our constituents expect. But also, I think I have had various conversations with other agencies about just some of the things the hurdles we put in the way in terms of the gap between, allocating that money and then getting it out the door to the intended recipient. And I look forward to continuing to work on that. That said, Representative Paulette.
I'm good. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for the opportunity to ask a couple of questions. I too will adhere to the past practice of the committee of just asking 2 questions. Before I start, I just want to say, thank you for putting the working draft out, Secretary, and of course, in the governor's office. I think we met last week. We talked about it. We've all had a chance to kind of review it. There's some proposals in here that I think are worthy and should get notice, particularly reducing fees on some of our trades across Connecticut. Those industries, particularly, they will feel that, and I appreciate that. In my area, flood mitigation, big problem in Oxford and Southbury. So I'm glad you've looked at that and addressed that. And of course, property tax, which I think is the most egregious, is addressed in here. With that being said, I think there's a few concerns that I've reviewed, and I just would like to get your opinion on. First of all, have you calculated the potential revenue loss from the federal government that conflict, like some of our policies here that conflict with the executive orders coming out of President Trump's administration?
No, we got a couple of questions from the press on that on Wednesday. We have not gotten specific information from the federal government about at OPM, we deal in, line items, numbers, specific programs, provisions. We're in touch with our agencies on a regular basis. I've had multiple calls this week. Had a discussion with one of my colleagues at lunch about contingencies. We just don't know. It's quite vague. It's quite broad. It's very concerning. But I don't yet have a contingency plan. We need to know what they're talking about. And when we see what they're doing, we'll pivot to that and we'll consult the relevant agency. We'll do options at OPM. We'll talk to our boss, the governor. He'll tell me what he wants to do, and then we'll come to you guys. We may have to involve you in whatever we do. I'm sure we will.
Thank you. And, not to get too far ahead of myself, my fear is, with some of our policies here in Connecticut and what we've been hearing out of DC, we could be at risk of losing a lot of money. And it's more of a reason to have some sort of a reserve fund. So that way, if and when we do lose money because of potential policies or whatever's voted on this session, we have a backup plan, because I do think it's going to become an issue. And my next question focuses around the hospitals. I represent part of Waterbury, as do many legislators, and the surrounding towns. Are Waterbury Hospital is one of our largest employers. Everyone knows what's going on right now with Prospect Medical. They're filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Yale was trying to buy them. Now we don't know if that's going to happen. And when I look through the budget, I was a little concerned regarding the tax on the hospitals, because, again, Waterbury itself, and I can probably speak for other communities, can't sustain one hospital. And the workers that work there, it's several hundred, if not over 1,000 jobs in our area. So can you say that your policy makes each individual hospital whole, or will some hospitals pay more in taxes than they will get back? And then furthermore, could this, further jeopardize a future buyer for someplace like Waterbury Hospital?
I would say that the last part of your question is the most important question for Waterbury Hospital today. What we're planning on doing with the hospital tax and the supplemental payments is in the second year. So we've still got more than a year to run on the existing agreement, which doesn't change anything. But in the next year or so, something may happen out of that bankruptcy, and we're monitoring that closely. We have representation there at the bankruptcy court. We've got issues around, a variety of interests, but our primary interest there, the governor's primary interest is if, as that process plays out, it's our hope that someone will acquire those hospitals, someone who will run them responsibly and in a way that assures that they continue as healthcare facilities in those communities. Are very important in those communities, all of them. We'd like to see that happen. That's the most important thing right now for Waterbury Hospital. Down the road, should they be under new management by then, or should we still be in this issue? Updating the tax base year will obviously be a new equitable move for all the hospitals, right? So there are winners and losers in the system. There were in 2016, and if you update that tax and rebase it, there'll be new winners and losers. It would be our goal to try and minimize the losers, obviously, particularly if they're already on the brink, as several of them are. But it's a complicated negotiation that we propose to commence with the hospitals this year. The comptroller's office is involved. As I said, our goal at the state is to leverage more federal money, update that tax, make it more equitable generally. They obviously have big asks. They think they're not compensated highly enough now. They're going to want something out of all of this. We'd like to, whatever we give them, we want to get more access, more quality, better outcomes, and more affordability for the citizens. So those are our goals. It's a complicated set of arrangements we have now. It'll be a complicated negotiation. We have a proposal. We're assuming in the second year certain numbers. Those may not be the numbers we land on after all of that, but those are our goals.
Thank you so much for that detailed response. And it means a lot, constituents of mine, folks that I was born at Waterbury Hospital. I just, when I hear something like winners or losers, it just concerns me a little bit that potentially a potential buyer could say, well, what if we're one of the losers? Okay, we don't want to buy this anymore. It could disproportionately affect us and jeopardize a future deal. So, when I saw the hospital proposal, it kind of stood up, because we are dealing with a very interesting situation, a sad situation, quite frankly, in Waterbury. And, I'm just hoping that none of the proposals out of Hartford affect a future potential deal. But I really thank you for explaining it. And Madam Chair, thank you for the indulgence for the two questions.
Thank you, Representative Paletta. Vice Chair Senator Cabrera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, sir, for being here. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. And I know it was touched upon earlier about what's happening at the federal government and the impact that may have on our budget. And I know you had mentioned here and in other venues that it's a bit of a wait and see and a bit vague. I'm wondering if you have any information on what some of your counterparts in other states have been talking about doing in regards to this.
I could get you some of that detail. We're part of something called the National Association of State Budget Officers. There are conversations happening all over the country. Obviously, everyone's in the same boat. But we can try to get you some, what we're hearing. We've been focused on our budget, in the last
Sure.
little while. So we're going to turn to that issue, I'm sure, as soon as, we're done with you guys and approves.
Okay, thank you. And then the second and last question is, especially specifically in regards to transportation. I know we have a lot of federal dollars tied up in there. Do you anticipate, some of the assumptions made there? What kind of ballpark number we can potentially have a hit here if this goes south?
I'm trying to console myself with the idea that there's some expenditures that even the red states like and want, and transportation's kind of in that category. So I'm not sure that's going to be a place they're going to hit us if they do. But again, we just don't know.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Senator. So I'm going to start with people in the room and then I promise I will get to those of you online. Representative Zaustowski, followed by Rep. Piscopo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today and for your presentation. Question about the universal preschool. I know this is a long-term project, but we very obviously don't have near the size of workforce that we will need to handle this. Can you just give us a bit of an idea of what the governor envisions, how this is going to work, whether it's going to be private providers or whether it's not going to be run through like public schools? Any insights on that would be really helpful.
Yes, certainly the current system is a public-private situation. In fact, childcare generally is 2/3 private pay in this state. Only about 1/3 is public pay, and it's means tested. The Commissioner of Early Childhood will be in front of APROPS and will be giving a detailed plan. She's got an initial plan that runs through 2032 to add tens of thousands of new spaces, as well as reducing costs to some of the current spaces. There's a goal to try and cover slots for families who are under $100,000 having no cost, and then having a limited cost share for families between 100 and 150,000. Now that's the eventual goal. That's not going to happen in the early years. As you say, you've got to build out capacity, both in terms of facilities and workforce. The local districts will have to be involved. At some point, this will be an extension of school, the regular schools. The initial plans are to have 3, 4, and 5-year-olds come in, the so-called school readiness or early childhood age range. And it's going to be gradual. It's going to be incremental. We won't have an unlimited amount of funds to build it out. It's going to happen a little bit every year. There's on the order of, I think, 10 or 20 million in the first year in the general fund, and the endowment is allowed to spend 10% of what's in it as well. So she'll have probably 50 or 60 million to spend in the early years on building this out, but it's going to take a long time. It's a multi-year exercise.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. It was very helpful. And my second question is, I'm new to this committee, so I'm after a long stint on APROPS. But this is a very basic question. How many states actually have a corporate tax surcharge? And where do we stand in terms of percentage charge with other states?
We will get that for you. My experts don't know that off the top of their heads.
Okay, thank you very
Lots
much.
of states have the corporation business tax or something like it, but whether they have a special surcharge is
Surcharge.
something we'd have to look into.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Piscopo, followed by Representative Berry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate you being here and your presentation. I'll just follow up quick on that corporate surcharge. It's always been a kind of a pet peeve of mine. It just seems like a disincentive to recruiting business to the state. Without violating any trust or any meetings or conversations you had in private, when you're putting the capital budget together, or not the capital budget, the regular revenue portion of our budget together, what goes on with the conversation with you and the Commissioner of Economic Development and the governor saying that we will let this ride for another 3 years? I mean, it seems like if any year we could try and let it sunset for once,
Yeah.
it would be a good year to do that.
So generally speaking, my boss, the governor, does talk to a lot of business people on a regular basis. He has Commissioner O'Keefe talking to business people on a regular basis. He, in the course of building this budget, had Commissioner O'Keefe do some um, work out there in the field to talk to people about what they liked, didn't like about our taxes. That one didn't make the cut as a big complaint. So had it made the cut, it might have not have survived, but I can tell you, we didn't hear about it that much.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And my second question is, at the risk of being sounding a little parochial, I was going through the capital, budget, and it looks like the school air quality improvements have been, cut or disqualified.
It's part of the school construction program now. They should come in that way. That was a COVID era plus up. I think we had it was ARPA at one point, and then I think there was some bonding set aside. There was obviously a concern at the time about ventilation. It was an airborne virus, but that particular concern is probably abated a little bit. But it's now part of the school construction program. If you have an HVAC issue in your school, you should come in through that way.
Thank you. And I probably should ask about pending applications if they're valid. I won't violate the 2-question.
DAS may have your answer.
Thank you. Representative Berry, followed by Senator Honig.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Secretary Beckham, for being here. My first question is in regard to the municipal spending cap. Can you just expand a little bit on that? And what happens if a town goes over that? And does that affect the state aid they receive?
Yes, it does. There's a longstanding cap on municipal spending. It's almost symbolic. The penalty, such as it is a 10%. You lose 10% of what you would otherwise have gotten from the so-called surplus provision in the municipal revenue sharing fund. That is, if there's a surplus at the end of the year that wasn't needed to pay for all the statutory grants, we did this once. Towns didn't expect it, neither did we, but we suddenly distributed a bunch of extra money. You would have had a 10% hit against that. Since we're proposing in this budget that we not bother with that because we'd prefer to appropriate it. If there's money there and you all want to do something else with it, we should bring it to you and have you tell us what to do with it, as opposed to us just distributing it to the towns. It's not really an issue at the moment because there's not enough money in the municipal revenue sharing fund. As I say, we've had to transfer general funds over to keep it whole so that the towns get all of what they're due under the statutory formulas. So since that's going away, we're simply proposing that there's another grant embedded in the MRSA, one of the line items in the municipal revenue sharing fund, that we would apply the 10% penalty against whatever they would do under that grant. Just continuing the idea that yes, there is a statutory municipal spending cap, and yes, there is a modest penalty if you go over it.
And it's currently 2.5%,
It's a 10% penalty.
but the cap itself is,
I think so. Or the rate of inflation apparently as well.
okay.
Like the spending cap at state level is inflation or growth in personal income.
I do have some concerns about the hit that the corporations are seeing. I know it's just a handful of corporations, but they are corporations nonetheless. I won't ask about the corporate surcharge because I think we've handled that, but I'll ask about another favorite topic, the highway use tax. How is that program going? And what do we expect for revenue and collectability? And
Collectability is still a challenge. I think we have a new plan for collectability through, there's an international or national group that collects highway trucker information and collecting it through that. It's coming in less than we originally proposed. I think we assumed 90 million. I think it's only at about 60 million or something like that. So it's less than we had hoped. Enforceability continues to be a challenge, but we're working on that.
Thank you. Representative Senator Honig is next, followed by Rep. Napoli, and then I promise to take the questions online and then I will come back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Secretary Beckham, for being here. Just a quick question about the reforming of the corporate taxation. You mentioned that the reforming the unitary tax will lead to a substantial amount of revenue in the next couple of years. Is there any particular sector of corporations that gets hit by that, or?
Apparently it's not, the 20 or so that it affects, it's not correlated with their size or their profitability. It's simply those who, very aggressively, source their income outside the state. So they would be the ones who probably getting the benefit from that, to the greatest extent. We're the only state that has unitary filing that has a cap on liability. We just think everyone should pay the taxes they're liable, and it puts them in the same boat as all the other corporations who pay that tax.
Is that kind of the general feeling of the business community that they want to see that, or everyone except those 20
I
corporations?
can't tell you that, but we thought it was a fair and equitable and reasonable thing to do under the circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Representative Napoli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary, thank you for being here and for your presentation. Just a couple of GO bond questions. The first one is MRDA, MRDA. And so in 2022, the bonding subcommittee reserved about $60 million for MRDA. I think there's about 59 million there. And so we certainly see the effort from the administration to support such a good program that can really have a good impact on our cities and towns. And so what do you see with MRDA in the near future?
So they just stood up. They have a new executive director, Dave Corus. We've given them in the budget, I think, a couple of positions to help him get that going. The hope there is that it will act like CERTA. Mike Freeman at CERTA has done a tremendous job in the Hartford area with both housing and economic development projects. And we're hoping to do that statewide. We're going to take CERTA statewide. So that's what MRDA will do. Dave Corus I've worked with him for many years. He's also very capable. Yeah. And we want to get that kind of energy and that kind of development going in all the cities and areas of the state that need more development, both in housing in terms of and business development.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And my second question is, I've noticed a shift from the Connect program to workforce innovation sustainability. Can you talk a little bit about that and what the plans are there?
I think that is probably a good question for the Office of Workforce Strategy or Department of Labor. I'll have to get you more information about that.
Thanks, Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And just a quick reminder for all the various follow-ups that we're probably, please send them to our clerk or administrator so we can distribute it to the whole committee. That'd be great, Secretary.
Someone behind me is taking notes.
Yes, we all rely on others. I'm going to move to online and then I will come back to people in the room. We'll begin with Senator Fazio, our ranking member.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your presentation. I'll ask a couple questions now, and then I'll probably circle back after everyone else has asked. But first, just to clarify, the separate and new spending account for the endowment for care and early education, that enables the state government to be spending more than in excess of the spending cap and the revenue cap that the fiscal guardrails contemplate, correct?
It doesn't have anything to do with the spending cap. It's not an appropriated fund, so it's not affected by the cap, nor does it affect the cap.
Yeah, I think, but listen, money's money. So if you add up everything that is appropriated and spent in the budget, and then you put this new, whether it's 10 million, 30 million per year on top of it, that theoretically is monies on top of whatever your increase in general fund spending is. No?
It is.
Okay. Why not spend it in the general fund?
The concept is that we are building out a new system over many years. It's going to take a considerable effort to do that. It's going to have the fund itself is going to have to grow. It's going to have to grow a lot to get to be big enough to throw off the state's share of a universal preschool system. And if it consumes cap room, there would inevitably be pressure not to do that, not to spend that money. And it's the governor's concept that it should be spent and we should build that capacity.
Yeah, and I think that is exactly the point of the spending cap, to place limitations on the growth of government spending. I guess I'm very surprised that it's not just it's on both sides of the aisle and the governor and the governor's office that for many years we have extolled the virtues of these fiscal controls, of these budget guardrails, and they have paid dividends for us. They've turned around in many cases, not fully, but they've begun to turn around the fiscal health of the state, and to be significantly altering not just the volatility cap, but also now creating a separate spending account that allows us to spend in excess of those spending limits and the revenue cap. I'm trying to understand why the departure from such a major policy that people, major leaders in the state on both sides of the aisle, including the administration, have been so strongly in support of?
Yeah, as I indicated in my response to Representative Horn, we've used the rules that were written into those very laws, both the spending cap provision in the Constitution and the volatility cap threshold provisions in the state statute, both of which contemplate that the General Assembly with a 3/5 vote can, on the one hand, appropriate unappropriated surplus or spend unappropriated surplus as we are proposing, and can move the threshold for the volatility cap. So it's not altering those guardrails. It's using the text that the General Assembly in its wisdom in the past wrote down and told us what to do, how to do this.
I agree you can do it, but I'm just wondering why you're doing it. And I'll then, because that's, I think, my two questions. After you answer that, I'll come back and raise my hand after everyone else speaks.
Well, the why is, as I've said, in the case of the Universal Preschool Endowment, the governor believes it's an historic movement forward for the state to build out a universal preschool system for our children. And he wants to set our state on the course of doing that.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Farrar.
Thanks. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, everyone. Great to see you all. I definitely, like all of us, have a couple questions, but I'll start off with just going to the heart of, I think, some of Senator Fazio's question, which is related to the proposal of the Universal Pre-K Endowment Fund. I do just want to acknowledge the great work for all of us in passing in a unanimous fashion last year, and the governor signing a bill that established the Early Childhood Care and Education Fund. And I can't help, Secretary, but hopefully think that the governor's team was maybe inspired by that to move in this direction with the endowment fund approach. And I really just had a first question about this type of investment and it really needing that ongoing revenue source to make sure that we really can support families and our economy. You mentioned that there is the use of the unallocated surplus, and that would potentially be close to $300 million in the first year. But I was hoping you could speak to what we could potentially project that could be in subsequent years.
Sure. It's not a regular revenue source. It's a contingency that in the event that we wind up with unappropriated surplus, that would be deposited. As you know, one of our other guardrails is the revenue cap, which requires that we not appropriate the last 1.25% of projected revenues. In this case, it happens to be a little over 300 million for each of the next 2 years. So should my team and OFA have guessed correctly about what the revenues will be, and we don't otherwise deal with them, because you could deal with them, you could appropriate them if you had cap room in either of the next 2 years. But if that comes through, then you would have another 300 million in each of the next 2 years. But again, it's contingent upon how things perform.
Thank you for that and for clarifying that. And I do think, given the questions we've heard, and I appreciate some of your answers about the governor's intent of really serving the growth of our kids, but families. But I was hoping you could speak to really how this type of investment is not only important for kids and families, but it actually could be helpful on the finance side of the budget, that we could see potential revenue with greater economic growth. Could you speak to that at all in regards to the potential value of this investment?
Well, it sounds like you could, and that's great. Commissioner Bai is going to have an extensive, detailed discussion about that with the Appropriations Committee. Yes, I mean, we're all aware, studies have shown for many, many years that the earlier you get to kids in terms of reading to them and talking to them and providing education to them, you enhance their life chances immeasurably. And that can't help but be, just intuitively can't help but be a good thing for the state itself, for our entire society. And yes, economic growth should improve in a society that takes much better care of its children and does a better job of educating them and getting them on a life's path that helps them avoid poverty and helps them become productive citizens. Senator Funfair agrees with me. I know I've heard him talk about this issue for many years, and you can't see him smiling, but I can.
Thank you, Secretary. And you're actually, you're fundamentally right that, as you said, the commissioner will be in front of appropriations. I hope, because this is a bill that does have an effect on our finance committee decisions, that same presentation could be shared with us, because I do think it'll highlight, as you said, the investment in our kids doesn't just pay off, but we know that more parents will be in the workforce, which also will contribute to that economic growth. So thank you for taking my questions. And I do look forward to, as I know all of us, in really making sure that we're making an investment that pays off for our future. So thank you to the Secretary and thank you to the Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Cohen will follow by Rep. Yacarino, and then we're going to circle back into the room for a little while. Senator Cohen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you for Mr. Secretary. Actually, I have a lot of questions, but knowing we're limited, I will focus on transportation, being the Senate Chair, and was surprised to see the fare increases. There was a fare equity analysis done in October of 23. I'm sure you're familiar. We increased fares subsequently 4.5%. And now it looks like we're going to be increasing fares on rail 5% in July and another 5% the following year. A little concerned about that for a number of reasons, certainly from an equity and cost standpoint, definitely from the standpoint of encouraging rail use at a time when, we're really, I know the governor has been incredibly focused on enhancing public transportation. We know the benefits are numerous: environmental benefits, reduced congestion, certainly quality of life benefits, wear and tear on the roads. And we just know, just by its nature, public transportation is highly subsidized. So wondered if you could speak a little bit to the mindset in terms of increasing those fares and what those fare increases are really going towards, because it doesn't sound like they will enhance public transportation.
You're correct. And I guess my answer would focus on the part of your question that acknowledges how heavily subsidized the system is. The question would be, how much of a subsidy are the taxpayers supposed to put up there? The costs are increasing all the time. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it's over the biennium, almost 100 million more in rail that's being appropriated. And I think about 67 million, if I recall correctly, in bus service. It's all very expensive and it's all heavily subsidized. So we're asking for a modest increase. The rail fare increases of recent years have not kept pace with inflation. It costs real money to run those trains, electricity and fuel of one kind or another. And we're providing the same service. That's not enhanced service, but it all costs money. And so we've got to get it somewhere, and we have to balance our budget and stay under the spending cap. So that's the sum total of, yes, ma'am.
I appreciate that. And I think some would say it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg. If you can increase and enhance fast, efficient, safe, and affordable service, then you will bring the ridership and hopefully lower the subsidies. But I appreciate that answer. And the last question I have is just with respect to federal funding for our transportation projects. Certainly, you were saying before to Senator Cabrera about us being in good standing, regardless of whether you're a red state or a blue state. It really seems like everybody can get on board with transportation projects in a very bipartisan way, which has certainly been the case. However, in light of the recent memo we got from the Transportation Secretary, I do have concerns and wonder if you do as well, and if anything's going into the planning of that, certainly tying transportation funding to birth and marriage rates. We know Connecticut is a bit low on that scale compared to other states. I think we're the 7th lowest. Tying it to cooperation with ICE and also tying it to other components in terms of Connecticut's standing, including having tolls or some other use tax, road usage tax. We do have the highway use tax, but we do not have tolls. And so there's a little bit of concern about prioritization. And I'm just wondering if the federal funding that we've secured that you show on that graph, which is incredibly impressive, is secured, we have contracts, or if that's up in the air pending decisions on prioritization according to the new memo from Secretary Duffy.
I do share your concern. But my answer on transportation is the same on all the other categories. We've not yet gotten notice that we have a specific problem with a specific stream or a specific set of funding. Commissioner Euclid can give you more detail when he appears in front of you about what the current arrangements are and what his expectations are. He has a very good relationship with US DOT, certainly at the staff level, and is working that issue. Yeah, it's all very concerning. And I guess just to say it, because no one really is, my biggest concern is the short-term impacts. I wouldn't expect a long-term impact because surely what they're proposing is unconstitutional. The president can't add criteria to spending programs after Congress has passed them. I think most lawyers who work in the administrative law area know that's blatantly unconstitutional. He can't do that. So I'm a little concerned about the short term. That's true. We may have to deal with a shortfall, but I have confidence if the courts, had the same kind of law class as I had, that they will conclude that this can't happen the way. They'll have to get the Congress to change those rules for it to have a long-term impact, it seems to me. I don't think that's going to happen, but we'll see.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Secretary. And just for the record, I am a passenger in a vehicle right now, just to alleviate any concerns. Okay, all right. But thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Yacarino.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I really apologize for not being there, but we had a little emergency today in town. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being there, and you and your team. I just have a couple questions. First, on the volatility cap, I think I see what you're trying to do, but I think the concern always is going after it, taking a bite out of the apple year after year. And I know your record is fiscally prudent. I don't know if you could just explain a little about it, or I got on a couple of minutes late.
Oh, the volatility cap threshold.
Yes.
Yes.
That has changed. That has changed over the last 6 years. It's gone up slightly just because of I'm not sure if it was inflation or just went up, I think, to 3.9 billion, if I'm not mistaken, the threshold.
That's right. It's about 3.9 now. It started at 3.1. It goes up every year based on inflation, growth in personal income, growth in personal income.
Gross, yeah.
And it would have continued to grow. But there has been considerable discussion, and the governor's had a lot of conversations with people who are concerned about its current level, that it was saving too much, being too restrictive, that more should be made available for the current needs of our residents. And he heard those concerns and is proposing to be flexible and to make a one-time increase in the volatility cap threshold, but it will leave a volatility cap in place, albeit with a slightly narrower buffer, if you will, of volatile revenue that won't be going to the general fund in case the projections don't come in. But that's where we landed, and that's what we're proposing.
All right, I appreciate that answer. And then the second, I've been an advocate for the bioscience STEM industry for good 12, 13 years. I've spoke to Commissioner O'Keefe about this and past commissioners about eliminating the capital stock-based tax, which is a minimal tax we collect. And then the R&D for companies that many times aren't making money, but they're investing hundreds of millions of dollars. I would argue that this will be actually a gain in time because of jobs and high income tax earners and just development in general. So I'd like to see this happen this year, if possible. That's a good thing, I think. And so I appreciate your team looking at that. And I think it's the right thing for our state and for jobs.
Thank you.
I'm done. Thank you, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all.
Representative.
Bye.
Back in the room, Representative Mashinsky, followed by Representative Zup.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Secretary Jeff, I wanted to ask you about total statutory formula aid. You said that towns would not get hit in any way, and I was looking at my town and it said we were going to lose around 56,000, which is not a lot, but it's 0.2%. But how are you holding us harmless?
Is that the assessment on the property tax, the cap?
This is the whole series of statutory formula aid
Yes.
pots.
Well,
And our total pot is dropping by 56,000.
come on up.
So if anybody knows whether we will be,
Martin
Held
Heft may
up.
know.
Good afternoon. So the total statutory grant formulas.
Undersecretary
Oh,
Martin
sorry.
Heft, Intergovernmental Policy Division.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So the totals that are in for these total statutory aid are made up of all the various different grant programs. Each year, those change based upon the data that is received and the grants recalculated. The main ones that change every year are tiered pilot, because your assessments change in your municipalities, your mill rates change, so the calculations change each year. Reval properties could go up, they could go down. So there's changes there. Motor vehicle tax could change reimbursement if your town is eligible for that with the 32.46 cap.
Yeah.
On that. So those are some of the big ones that change, which could fluctuate your totals there. There is a provision that any of some of the special payments are just being moved to another grant, and that's all being held harmless. So no one's losing funds in that sense for that in the total grants.
okay, I'm still confused as to whether we're actually losing money or not. Is it, or is it just the ECS that you're making sure we're not losing? Is that?
My comment was no town is getting less than they should get under the statutory formulas. I didn't say they weren't getting less money. We are holding you harmless in terms of your statutory formulas. We're not making any changes to the formulas or anything like that that would arbitrarily take money away. In fact, we're transferring general fund, $85 million to the municipal revenue sharing fund to make sure that every town gets what they're due under the statutory formula grants. But those formulas over time do result in towns getting less money sometimes. That's what the formula does.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I didn't, okay, now that you clarified, I understand what you mean. So if something changes in the way our grant is calculated because of the data that comes in from our town, then there may be a drop like this small drop that we noticed. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Thank you, Representative Zup.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for coming today. Mr. Secretary, I sit on the Select Committee for Special Education, and we all know that that is a big focus, I think, for everyone in this whole building and at the Capitol. And so could you just explain to me, because I know excess cost is never fully funded. It's not now. From the synopsis I have, 40 million is put into it. How is that 40 million spread out? Because there's a lot of money needed, and I don't think that does anything, to be honest. Not that 40 million is not a lot of money, but when there's so much needed and things aren't funded and the whole push is for special education, your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are there's a total of $54 million in the budget for special education. 10 million is a new competitive grant program that SDE is going to run to try and get some in-district special education programming set up. And there's 4 million in the Bond Act to allow for some facilities to be improved for that purpose as well. The 40 million goes to the current excess cost grant that SDE runs. I think it goes about halfway to fulfilling the current unfunded portion, if I'm not mistaken. I'm getting a nod from my education expert. So yeah, the governor thought it was important that we do something on special ed. And this is the most it's been done in many years in terms of adding resources for special ed. We know it's a big problem for towns. You know, under the heading of not doing enough, the federal government passed the mandates for special ed many years ago. And the promise at the time was that they were going to kick in quite a bit of money. They don't. So yeah, I'd like to see more out of the feds on this as well.
I would agree with you about the feds for sure. It was 40%. And even the president at the time, I think it was Carter, I could be mistaken, said it'll never be funded fully.
Yeah.
What? Excuse me?
We agree.
So even the president said this is, and so as I look at these numbers, we're doing the same thing. We're saying you're getting this money knowing that they're not going to get the fully funding. And so I think that's a really frustrated point with the schools. So I just wanted to know your thoughts. The 10 million for the grants is great. For in-district, that's a whole thing to be thought through.
Mhm.
I'm not sure about that either, and
Yeah.
that's for another discussion, but I just wanted to know your thoughts on special ed because that is a focus of what I'm hearing from the governor.
Yes.
And not that I want to spend hundreds of millions, this is not a PROPS, but it's going to be a lot of money.
Yes, the more can be done and should be done eventually in special ed. There are lots of sources of new resources for towns and school districts. The town itself can be contributing more to the Board of Ed's expenses. You can find savings in your budget. I have to do that for a living, and I know that people at the local level are capable of that as well if they want to make more resources available for certain things. So if they do more on a regional basis, that's something that could be done on a regional basis as well, because that's an irregular expense. You don't know who's going to show up and need services from year to year, but if you had something happening regionally, you might be able to be more flexible. There are a lot of tools that towns and districts have at their disposal to cope with this. So we're happy to provide substantial new resources for special education, the most in many years, and hopefully work on this issue some more.
I do believe, I mean, we all have to budget, even on a family level. I do believe our schools, and I'll just point out Meriden, if Representative Santiago was anywhere listening, they do probably the best job at their pupil ratio. So I do believe our towns are trying, and they do budget, and they do give up things. So I don't think it's one versus another. I think everybody's in it together, but special ed is huge, and it will be interesting to see what the final result of that is. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Returning to those who have been patiently waiting online, we have Representative Berger Cavalla.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. Unfortunately for you, you ended up with both of the chairs of transportation here. So we're going to hit you with those questions. I'll try to be gentle, actually, because I really appreciated your comment that the shortfall that we are anticipating is likely to be short term. I think sometimes we need a reminder that the unconstitutional attempt to kind of coerce us into behaving has it's not something that is likely to be the continuity there is probably not real. So I do appreciate that very much. I would like to hear a little bit more about the line that was moved, the allocation out of STF into the general fund. I would imagine that that decision was made as we were sitting in the summer on a pile of unspent STF funds. And I would love to know if there was consideration for, am I freezing up here?
Nope, I can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I'm freezing up on my end, so I apologize. I was just wondering if there was consideration made for the fact that we are likely, at least in the immediate future, to be penalized, if you will, at the federal level.
Penalized for?
Considering the Secretary of Transportation's memo of requests, demands, however you want to put it,
yes, we're monitoring all that. And if we get a specific revenue stream that has been interrupted and we have a confirmation that that's happening and we need to somehow make it up, we will immediately work on an option for the governor and bring it to you and see how you want to proceed. We have a limited amount of tools to deal with that. Whether we can prevent every bad thing from happening that might happen, I don't know, but we will certainly give it a shot.
Appreciate that. Getting back to the STF allocation itself, that that particular line that does predate both of the chairs of transportation. Do you happen to know when that was moved into STF?
The town aid road piece, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yes, we did it 2 years ago. It was my idea. We thought we'd bring it on to the under the cap onto the special transportation fund. But we need to balance that fund. And one of the tactics we can employ is to use the capital budget for that purpose, as it was used for many years prior to it being moved 2 years ago.
I thought it was a good move in retrospect, but thank you very much. I do appreciate you answering the questions, and thank you again, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you. Representative Constantine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. I've seen a lot of lines on the Cannabis Prevention and Recovery Services Fund. I was wondering, is any funding going this year towards the Tobacco and Health Trust Fund? Is it going to be resumed this year after being suspended last year?
Yes, I think the 12 million goes to that fund in each year of the biennium.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other first-time questions from people who have not asked questions yet? I don't see anybody online, and I don't see anybody in the room. With that, we will go to a second round. Senator Fazio.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the indulgence, and thank you to the Secretary for the indulgence. So the $300 million that is being put into the endowment for the early childhood and care account, how does that money get managed? What type of account is it put into?
It'll be managed by the Treasurer's Office in the way they manage our pension funds as a trust fund. Hopefully with the savings target, they have earnings target of 6.9% for the pension funds. We hope that they'll be using the same array of investments to get a similar type of return, if not better.
Okay, so it's the same type of more aggressive investment strategy, the 6.9 or the 8%, whatever investment strategy, not like a low yield money market type thing.
We're going to rely on the Office of the Treasurer to use their good judgment as they do with our pension funds.
Okay, well then I think we definitely in the legislature want to keep track of that because, you know, if they're putting it in a lower yield account, then it seems like a, you know, it would be an enormous foregone cost or foregone returns there. So obviously it's less predictable, but I think it's very important because obviously otherwise that surplus could be used to spend down the unfunded pension debt that we have, which accrues at 6.9 or 8%. So so we want to make sure that we're managing our monies pretty well. On the tax side, you know, there are a couple of changes that I do applaud you all on, and you know, I and others on both sides of the aisle have been calling for a cut to workers' licensing fees for a couple of years, and we're really glad to see that that is included in the budget. On the business income side, I think there's a lot of concerns, and you know, so if I'm adding up all the tax changes in the proposed budget, it appears that in the out years, in the second year, that it's a net tax increase. Is that correct addition?
I haven't done the math, but I think you're correct that the dollar value of the increases exceed the dollar value of the cuts. However, certainly the number of taxpayers who are benefited are enormous, and the number of taxpayers who are inconvenienced is quite small.
Yeah, you know, that is a concern, and you know, especially so, you know, some of the business tax increases, they might not be unfair if they were paired with larger tax reductions. You know, whether it's on the surcharge or other things. I guess you know, has there been a communication with the 20 firms that are set to receive the increase, or the whatever number of firms that are set to see $130 million tax increase from the change in the tax cap? Is there a concern that by spreading such a large tax increase over such a few number of firms that we're potentially going to see jobs leave the state because of it?
as I indicated in answer to a prior question, the governor speaks to the representatives of the business community on a regular basis and business owners, and he has Commissioner O'Keefe doing the same thing. And we did socialize some of our ideas with that community, and we went forward with these proposals based on the assumption that there was low risk of what you described.
Okay, well, I appreciate your time and the indulgence. As I expressed earlier, I would have liked to see the fiscal guardrails remain as they did, and to see a net tax decrease rather than a slight increase. But I look forward to working with everyone through the budget process, and hopefully we can make the budget as something that as many people agree on in the end as possible. Thanks for everyone's time.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Winter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Secretary Beckham. I had a question about the change to the volatility cap and why the 5-year average range is from 2012 to 2016. If I'm understanding the slide correctly, you're using that range of years to make a 5-year average and then applying a volatility cap growth rate to that. Why that rather than looking at a more recent average, the average over the last 5 years?
We thought that those 5 years represented a more representative range. If you use the last 5 years, you have an extraordinary set of revenue years bolstered by the federal disbursements to businesses and individuals during the COVID period. You had some federal tax changes in the 2017, 2018 timeframe that resulted in I've gone green, which is good. It's the color of money. Resulted in a massive one-time influx or repatriation, I think it was referred to, of monies offshore. So you had really some distorted revenue years in the last 5 years. So if you use the last 5 years, you'd wind up with almost no volatility cap threshold. The threshold would go so far up, there'd be a very thin amount of money left as a so-called buffer. The governor wasn't comfortable with not having a buffer. That would have effectively eliminated the volatility threshold, the volatility cap. So the 5 that we landed on, which happened to have been the 5 that would have been used at the time, had they simply used the 5 years preceding, if you grew it by the statutory formula, got us to a place the governor was comfortable in recommending. So it provided flexibility. It allows more revenue to come to the general fund as requested by many, but left a buffer that he was comfortable with. So that's why we landed there.
No, thank you for that explanation. It seems like a consequential decision, and I think it's worth looking at, at how we're averaging that and how we come to the cap calculations. I appreciate your perspective on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. And I think we will close with Ranking Member Representative Paletta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And one brief question. I'll just say that this whole informational hearing has been great for me, and I'm sure many of the folks that are here or that are online, like the question that was just asked before. I think this is why we do this, right? We're not always going to agree on everything. I'm sure there's 100 in the House. I can speak. There's probably 151 different proposals that folks would like to see be the final document. But this is a working draft, and I think we're here to flesh out some of the details and understand the thinking of the executive branch, but also kind of where the legislative branch is heading. So with that, my final question kind of focuses again around this volatility adjustment. As many have mentioned before, the last 7-8 years, we've seen Connecticut, and as you mentioned, sir, pay down upwards of $10 billion in debt. Still, though, per capita, we're one of the most indebted states in the nation. It's a big problem. It's a problem for people that want to live, work here, that want to raise their family here, that want to retire here, because they're thinking to themselves, what is the future going to look like? I think a budget is a lot of times is about predictability. It's also about priority. The priority of this building, of the executive branch and of the legislative branch, has been to maintain these caps. So by loosening them or adjusting them in any way, I think kind of negates a lot of what we did. But again, probably going to be debated a lot over the next several months. But I think it's fair to say that, we've kind of run on one thing the last several years, and now all of a sudden it's like, wait, we're going to change it up. And for the average person out there that is saying, "Phew, you know, Connecticut might have turned the corner. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to invest my time here, my business, grow my family here." They might be saying, whoa, you know, are they backing up on what they did? Or going back, excuse me, rather, on what they said they were going to do in the future. So my question is around the volatility cap as it relates to the bond lock. Very simple question. Does changing the volatility cap in fiscal year 26, 27 affect the current bond lock language in our bonds currently offered?
Yeah. We don't change so the bond lock has a list of statutes that you cannot change during the period of the lock. This doesn't change any of the statutes. It uses one of them. By its very terms, it says you can, with a 3/5 vote, increase the amount of the threshold. So no violation of the bond lock.
Okay, thank you.
It's very carefully crafted.
Thank you. Thank you to the members of the committee for a good conversation. And again, thank you for your work on this. I'm sure there are many other questions that come up here, but we know that you are responsive to those requests. And so we thank you for that.
Call us anytime.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And have a good weekend, everyone. Oh, wait, sorry. I have a job, which is to the announcement of the time and date of next meeting. We are having our first actual committee meeting. Not the introductory one, on Monday, February 10th at 11 o'clock. And see you all then. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.